A drink sitting in millions of American kitchens right now contains compounds the World Health Organization classifies as potentially carcinogenic, and most people have no idea they're consuming it every single morning. You trust these brands because you grew up with them. They were in your parents' cupboards, your grandparents' cupboards, stacked in diners, offices, hospitals, and hotel rooms across the country. They're cheap, they're convenient, and they promise one thing above all else: comfort. But what if that comfort is coming at a cost your body has been quietly paying for years? Because while Americans argue about sugar, calories, and caffeine, almost nobody is talking about how instant coffee is actually made, what's stripped out during processing, and what's left behind. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some of the most trusted coffee brands in the United States are selling you a product so aggressively processed that it barely resembles coffee anymore. So which instant coffee brands are quietly wrecking America's morning routine? Let's start with the worst offender. Maxwell House isn't just a brand, it's an institution. Founded in the late 1800s, it became synonymous with American coffee culture. Good to the last drop wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise passed down through generations. For decades, Maxwell House positioned itself as dependable, affordable, and familiar. If you grew up in the US, there's a strong chance this was the first coffee you ever smelled brewing in the morning. But Instant Maxwell House is a completely different product from the nostalgic image it trades on. What you're actually drinking starts with low-grade coffee beans, often Robusta, chosen not for flavor or quality, but for yield and cost. These beans are roasted aggressively, pushing them toward bitterness, then brewed into a concentrate and subjected to spray drying at extremely high temperatures. That process doesn't just remove water, it destroys delicate flavor compounds, degrades antioxidants, and dramatically increases the formation of acrylamide, a chemical that forms when foods are cooked at high heat and is classified as a probable human carcinogen. Independent taste tests routinely rank Maxwell House instant at or near the bottom. Reviewers describe it as burnt, hollow, and chemical, with an aftertaste that lingers unpleasantly. But taste is only part of the problem. Spray drying creates a powder that dissolves easily, but it also concentrates whatever contaminants were present in the beans to begin with. And because there is no requirement in the United States to disclose mold testing for coffee, consumers have no way of knowing what they're ingesting. You're paying for speed and familiarity, not quality or safety. And the betrayal here is subtle. You don't feel sick immediately. You just normalize the headaches, the jitters, the stomach discomfort. You assume it's stress, or age, or caffeine itself. The brand gets a free pass because it's always been there. Folgers might be even more deeply embedded in American identity than Maxwell House. Their commercials didn't just sell coffee, they sold home. Warm kitchens, family breakfasts, a sense of belonging. The best part of waking up wasn't about flavor, it was about emotion. And that emotional trust is exactly why Folgers Instant deserves scrutiny. Because once again, the product doesn't live up to the story. Folgers Instant Coffee is designed to be as cheap and shelf-stable as possible. That means heavy reliance on spray drying, aggressive roasting, and bean sourcing that prioritizes volume over quality. The result is a powder that dissolves quickly but tastes thin, bitter, and oddly metallic. Consumer reports consistently describe it as watery yet harsh at the same time, a contradiction that only makes sense when you understand how stripped down the product really is. During processing, many of the natural oils that give coffee its richness are removed or destroyed. What remains is caffeine and bitterness. And like Maxwell House, Folgers Instant shows higher acrylamide levels than brewed coffee due to the extreme heat used during manufacturing. What makes Folgers particularly insidious is how often it's consumed by older Americans, retirees, fixed-income households, and people who have been loyal to the brand for decades. These are the same populations more vulnerable to cumulative chemical exposure over time. But because Folgers is cheap and familiar, it's rarely questioned. The brand doesn't need to prove anything. It already owns your trust. Nescafe is a global giant. Owned by Nestlé, it's one of the most widely consumed coffee brands on Earth. In the US, it positions itself as slightly more refined than budget brands, especially with lines like Taster's Choice. The name alone implies discernment, as if someone somewhere carefully selected this coffee just for you. But Nescafe's instant products rely on the same industrial shortcuts as its cheaper competitors. Large-scale spray drying, mass-produced blends, and sourcing from regions where quality control is inconsistent at best. Over the years, Nescafe has faced repeated criticism for flavor that consumers describe as stale, flat, or artificial. That instant taste people complain about? That's not inevitable. It's a result of processing choices. And Nestlé's scale works against you here. When you're producing coffee for millions of people every day, the incentive is consistency, not excellence. That means blending beans from multiple origins, masking defects through roasting, and prioritizing shelf life over nutritional integrity. Nescafe does not publish mold testing data. It does not disclose acrylamide mitigation strategies. It doesn't need to. US regulations don't require it. So once again, the consumer is left guessing. And because Nestlé operates across food, water, and infant nutrition, its reputation gives Nescafe an aura of legitimacy that discourages scrutiny. People assume a company that big must know what it's doing. But size doesn't equal care. It equals efficiency. This is Walmart's house brand, and it exists for one reason: price. When margins are this tight, something has to give, and it's never profit. Great value instant coffee is made to hit the lowest possible cost per serving while still being legally sold as coffee. That means cheap beans, maximum yield, and minimal concern for flavor or long-term health implications. Reviews consistently describe it as weak, sour, or oddly bitter, with a dusty aroma that barely resembles coffee at all. But the bigger issue is transparency. Store brands don't have reputations to protect in the same way legacy brands do. If consumers complain, Walmart can simply adjust suppliers quietly or discontinue the product. There's no accountability narrative, no heritage to defend. And because many shoppers buy great value products to save money during financially stressful times, they're less likely to question quality. You convince yourself it's good enough. But when it comes to something you consume daily, good enough can quietly become harmful over time. That's 4 brands down, and the pattern should be making you uncomfortable. Cheap beans, extreme heat, minimal oversight, no transparency. And the worst part is this: none of this is illegal. In fact, it's completely normal in the US food system. But before I show you the brands that take a very different approach, you need to understand why instant coffee in America is allowed to be this bad in the first place, and why almost nobody connects their symptoms back to what's in their mug. Clover Valley is Dollar General's in-house brand, and it's everywhere. Rural towns, low-income neighborhoods, places where Dollar General isn't just a store, but the only store. Clover Valley exists to serve customers who don't have many alternatives, and that makes what happened next especially disturbing. In 2024, Clover Valley Instant Coffee was recalled nationwide due to potential glass contamination. Not a flavor issue, not a labeling issue. Glass. Hard, sharp fragments that could cause internal injury if swallowed. That recall didn't happen because the system worked perfectly. It happened because something went wrong enough that it couldn't be ignored. And it raises an uncomfortable question. If glass made it into the final product, what else has slipped through unnoticed over the years? Dollar General doesn't operate boutique supply chains. These products are manufactured at scale, with relentless pressure to keep costs down. Quality control becomes a balancing act between speed and risk. And while the recall made headlines briefly, it disappeared just as quickly. Most consumers never heard about it. Even fewer connected it to a broader issue with ultra-cheap instant coffee. The brand continued selling similar products. The shelves refilled. Life went on. That's the pattern. A momentary scandal, followed by collective amnesia. Dunkin' is a perfect example of brand confusion. People associate it with fresh coffee, poured behind the counter, pink and orange branding, and the daily ritual of grabbing a cup on the way to work. But the instant coffee sold in grocery stores is a completely different product from what's brewed in Dunkin' locations. The instant version is manufactured for shelf stability, not cafe quality. It lacks transparency around bean sourcing, processing methods, and contaminant testing. Reviewers often note that it tastes thin and oddly acidic, lacking the body people expect from the brand. And because Dunkin' doesn't position its instant coffee as a health product, it escapes scrutiny. Consumers assume that because the brand is famous for coffee, the instant version must be held to the same standards. It isn't. This is a licensing play, not a craftsmanship play. The name does the heavy lifting. The product just has to be passable. Café Bustelo occupies a strange place in American coffee culture. It's beloved, fiercely defended, and often associated with strong, bold flavor and cultural identity. For many households, especially in Latino communities, Bustelo isn't just coffee, it's tradition. But tradition doesn't protect a product from industrial shortcuts. The instant version of Café Bustelo is frequently criticized for harshness and bitterness that goes beyond strength. That's a key distinction. Strong coffee can be smooth. Harsh coffee usually isn't. The instant Bustelo relies on dark roasting and processing to deliver intensity, but in doing so, it sacrifices balance and complexity. And like the other brands on this list, it offers no public data on mold testing or acrylamide reduction. When you buy it, you're buying trust, not information. And when consumers complain, the response is often emotional rather than analytical. That's just how it's supposed to taste. But supposed to, according to whom? The brand or your body? Kroger and other generic store brand instant coffees. Kroger, Target, Stop and Shop, Safeway. Different logos, same underlying model. These products are often made by third-party manufacturers producing multiple store brands at once. Same factories, same machinery, slightly different labels. The goal is not excellence, it's margin. Reviews of these instant coffees are remarkably consistent across retailers. Weak flavor, strange aftertaste, inconsistent dissolving. But the real issue is invisibility. When a national brand disappoints you, you remember it. When a store brand disappoints you, you shrug and move on. There's no reputation to challenge, no story to confront. And because these brands are cheaper, consumers often blame themselves rather than the product. What did I expect for the price? That mindset is exactly what allows low standards to persist. At this point, it would be easy to blame individual companies, but that would miss the bigger picture, because the real scandal isn't that these brands exist, it's that the system allows them to operate this way with almost no oversight. In the United States, coffee is regulated as a food, but instant coffee occupies a gray area where processing methods are largely unexamined. There is no federal requirement for coffee brands to test for mold toxins like ochratoxin A. There is no mandatory disclosure of acrylamide levels on packaging. Companies are allowed to self-monitor, self-report, and self-correct. The FDA operates on a reactive model, not a proactive one. Problems are addressed only after enough people complain, get sick, or draw media attention. And most people never make the connection between their daily coffee and their symptoms. They blame anxiety, age, sleep, or stress. They never suspect the beige powder they've been dissolving in hot water for years. And then there's the processing itself. Most people don't realize there are two very different ways instant coffee is made: spray drying and freeze drying. Spray drying blasts coffee extract with extremely hot air, evaporating the water almost instantly. It's fast and cheap, but brutal. Freeze drying, on the other hand, freezes the coffee and removes water through sublimation at low temperatures. It's slower and more expensive, but it preserves more of the coffee's original compounds. The problem is that most budget brands won't tell you which method they use, because if it's spray-dried, they don't want you thinking about what that heat does to the final product. Real instant coffee made with care doesn't hide this information. It highlights it. This is where the narrative finally shifts, because not all instant coffee is created equal. And despite what the worst brands would like you to believe, it is possible to choose options that don't immediately raise red flags. Brands that invest in better beans, gentler processing, and transparency. They're not perfect. Instant coffee, by its nature, is still processed, but the difference is intent. And you can feel that difference in how your body responds. If you're not ready to give up instant coffee entirely, if convenience still matters, there are two brands that consistently stand apart from the rest. Not because they're magical or flawless, but because they make fewer compromises and they don't rely entirely on nostalgia or price to sell you their product. These are the options that don't make experts wince when they look at the label. The first brand that genuinely breaks the pattern is Mount Hagen. Mount Hagen doesn't look flashy. No celebrity endorsements, no aggressive nostalgia marketing, no promises about being the best part of your morning. And that's exactly why it stands out. This is one of the few instant coffee brands that openly tells you how it's made. Freeze-dried, not spray-dried. That single decision changes almost everything. Freeze-drying avoids the extreme heat that destroys coffee's natural compounds and drives up acrylamide formation. It preserves more of what coffee actually is, instead of reducing it to caffeine and bitterness. Mount Hagen also uses 100% Arabica beans, which are naturally lower in bitterness and generally higher quality than the Robusta beans commonly used in budget instant coffee. It's certified organic, which matters more than people realize. Organic certification doesn't just mean fewer pesticides, it means stricter controls at multiple stages of production, including storage, where mold contamination often occurs. Is it perfect? No. It's still instant coffee. It's still processed. But when experts look at Mount Hagen, they don't see the same red flags. No artificial flavors, no chemical masking, no attempt to distract you with branding while hiding the fundamentals. People who switch to it often report something subtle but telling. Fewer jitters, less stomach irritation, a calmer energy curve. Not because it's a health product, but because it's not actively working against you. And that's a low bar most instant coffees still fail to clear. The second option is more complicated, but it's impossible to ignore because it's one of the most recognizable coffee names on the planet. Starbucks VIA. Starbucks VIA isn't a purity product. It's not organic across the board. It doesn't publish mold testing data. And it's still highly processed. But what it does differently is crucial. VIA isn't just spray-dried powder. It uses a blend of instant coffee and micro-ground coffee, meaning actual coffee particles are preserved in the final product. That changes the texture, the flavor, and the physiological response. It's closer to real coffee than most instant options on supermarket shelves. Starbucks also has something many brands lack entirely: reputational risk. When a company operates at that scale, scrutiny follows. Mistakes are amplified. Complaints spread faster. That pressure forces a higher baseline standard, even if it doesn't guarantee perfection. The plain VIA varieties avoid artificial sweeteners and flavorings, which is where many instant products quietly go off the rails. And while it's not the cleanest option available, it's a meaningful step up from Folgers, Maxwell House, or Nescafe for people who want something familiar but less aggressively processed. The key is how you frame it. Starbucks VIA isn't a health drink. It's simply less bad. And in a market flooded with products that rely on shortcuts, less bad can be the difference between daily irritation and tolerable routine. What makes these two brands unforgettable isn't that they're extraordinary, it's that they expose how low the industry standard has fallen. Once you understand the difference between spray-dried and freeze-dried coffee, once you realize how little oversight exists, once you see how much marketing is used to distract from processing shortcuts, you can't unsee it. You start reading labels differently. You start noticing which brands explain themselves and which ones hide behind slogans. You realize that most instant coffee isn't cheap because it's efficient. It's cheap because it cuts corners you were never meant to notice. And here's the part most people miss. The symptoms people blame on coffee itself aren't always caused by caffeine. The jitters, the acid reflux, the headaches, the sudden anxiety spike. For some people, it's not coffee that's the problem. It's what's been done to it. When you remove oils, degrade antioxidants, concentrate contaminants, and strip away complexity, you're left with a stimulant delivery system, not a beverage, and your body reacts accordingly. That's why some people swear coffee ruins them, while others thrive on it. They're not drinking the same thing, even if the label says coffee. The industry doesn't benefit from you understanding this. Confusion keeps you loyal. Nostalgia keeps you compliant. Price keeps you quiet. And regulation stays comfortably minimal, as long as consumers don't connect the dots. Because once you do, the question becomes unavoidable. Why am I paying for something that makes me feel worse, just because it's familiar? This isn't about fear, it's about clarity. Instant coffee will always be a compromise, but there's a difference between a compromise made for convenience and a compromise made entirely at your expense. Once you know which brands consistently choose the cheapest path and which ones at least attempt to respect the product, you can't go back to ignorance. The morning ritual changes. The cupboard changes. The autopilot breaks. And that's why this conversation matters. Not because you need to quit coffee, not because you need to obsess over purity, but because the most powerful consumer move isn't outrage, it's awareness. The moment you understand what you're actually drinking, the industry loses its greatest advantage: your silence. Which brand surprised you the most? And which one is sitting in your kitchen right now? Let us know. And if you want to see another breakdown like this, the next video is already waiting on your screen.